With the events of June 25th still so fresh on our minds, we are now preparing for June 27th. Yeah. And folks, it does not look good. It does not look good for the government of William Samoei Ruto. Not at all. Although we have talk of the deployment of the Kenya Defence Forces, which was officially announced by the Defence CS, Aden Duale, quoting sections of our laws. And indeed he was announcing it when the military was already deployed. It appears that the government forgot something. They forgot that military deployment anywhere requires the approval of the National Assembly. Okay? But then I believe somebody said, no problem. And what happened next was pop, 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 pop. And this morning, a member of Parliament, who was not even aware of this parliamentary session, informed us that Parliament somewhere had already given the approval. Now, that is pure comedy. How did that happen? You are a member of the National Assembly, and then the first thing you hear is that the National Assembly has passed something, and let alone the fact that you are not there. You are not even aware of this session of Parliament. What kind of country has Kenya become? There are a lot of technicalities. Even if indeed the National Assembly met, let us assume that the National Assembly met after UDA people came on WhatsApp, including the Speaker, and decided to meet somewhere. Okay? There would be a problem. There would be many problems. First of all, this was not covered by the press. You see, the National Assembly cannot meet in your bedroom. They can't. Or in your house. And then there's the business of the Speaker's mace. Now we all saw yesterday that this was stolen by one of the protesters who stormed Parliament. And you see, traditionally, the mace is very significant. Let me just give you a few examples from the past to prove my point. In June 1997, during the Moi presidency, the final term of the Moi presidency, opposition members of Parliament repeatedly attempted to grab the mace to disrupt the reading of the finance bill from the then finance minister, Musalia Mudavadi. And it's like there was a struggle. Government legislators were defending the Speaker's mace, and the opposition members of Parliament were desperately trying to grab it. Of course they failed, but it is significant that they were trying to grab it. But even more telling, in 2014, legislator Fred Outa grabbed the mace and ran off with it. Why? He was trying to stop a vote on the floor of Parliament. Meaning that without the mace, which represents Parliament's authority and especially the Speaker's authority, that vote would not have been able to proceed. Very significant. Anyway, the National Assembly meets at somebody's house, and then they use the kitchen knife as the mace. And they approve the deployment of the KDF on Kenyan soil, on the streets, and not fighting an external enemy, but confronting the citizens of the Republic of Kenya, the people the military are supposed to defend. Okay? Is alright? Is alright. Okay? There are still issues here. You see the crisis we have in Kenya today, triggered by protests from not only the Gen Z, but the majority of the people of Kenya, is a crisis involving the Kenyan public. The employers of President Ruto, the employers of Parliament, the employers of the Kenya Defence Forces. Okay? I think we agree on that. And so I want to ask a simple question. The deployment of the KDF forces is for the benefit of who? Because it is definitely not for the benefit of the employers of the KDF and the president and Parliament. It isn't. So who is it going to benefit? Well, I think the answer to that question is very obvious. And I believe many people have been able to see through this. The whole idea is to scare the Kenyan public, to scare the current campaign for a better Kenya, the current fight against the draconian evil Finance Bill 2024. That is why KDF have been deployed. But let me back up a little so that we understand this much better, and so that we have some solid meat behind what we are saying. Now you'll remember on the eve of the dramatic and fateful June 25th, 2024, there was a presser hosted by internal CS Kithure Kindiki, and he was flanked by his permanent secretary Raymond Omolo. Now, I was already preparing my notes to do a video on that super fascinating presser, okay? But events overtook the whole thing. And what I was going to say in that video has been vindicated 1000% by what has happened since then. And what had really attracted my attention was the body language, which was much more than super fascinating. Kithure Kindiki was very nervous. Now, I've seen a lot of his press conferences in the past. He's usually relaxed. But this one, hey, he was very nervous. Not only that, his permanent secretary Raymond Omolo had a very telling expression on his face. That expression spoke volumes. It told me that there was something he was very wary about, almost scared about. Okay? And there was something he was hiding. Okay, you're allowed to write me off and tell me I don't know what I saw. But I'm sure at least some of you have heard of the rumor that there's a huge rift in cabinet. On one side is Kithure Kindiki, by the way, who's a law professor, and on the other side is Aden Duale. Now, Kindiki's views came out very clearly in that presser. And in a nutshell, what he was saying is that the government was going to allow peaceful protests and even protect protesters according to our constitution, okay, and according to international law. Now, it is apparent that Professor Kithure Kindiki's view is that this crisis on the Ruto administration can easily be fixed within the law, and while strictly adhering to our constitution. However, the view of the other side, led by Aden Duale, was that this thing needed to be shut down as soon as possible, like yesterday, by whatever means. Otherwise, there was a danger that it would get out of control, and Ruto would quickly find himself out of power. And of course, Duale and company out of a job, a very lucrative, prestigious job. Now, I'm sure we all know that there are a lot of people who turned up for the protests on 25th June after that presser by Kindiki, because they were reassured. Kindiki as much as gave us his word that the police would not use excessive force, let alone live ammunition. Armed with those reports, some verified, some unverified, the events of 25th June now make perfect sense. The day started with Kindiki in charge, and then somewhere along the way, somebody or some people panicked, and they started doing the very things Professor Kindiki had promised us would not happen, the government would not do. And it is very easy to read the thoughts of the other side of the cabinet. Scare off the protesters, simply piga watu wachache risasi kwa kichwa, wataogopa na hii maneno itaisha. We can deal with the repercussions and the consequences later. Okay, at least would have stopped this thing. That was the thinking, clearly. But what happened? Indeed, the very opposite. There is evidence to suggest that those marisasi provoked and inspired those Kenyans to get into the National Assembly by whatever means possible. Because after all, just think about it if you're there. Because after all, why die for nothing? Why not achieve something? That must have been the thinking. And by the way, it completely beats me, and I'm sure many people all over the world, how the police can use snipers on demonstrators. It doesn't make any sense, and I believe it will never make any sense. And now it is easy to look at the deployment of the KDF in the same lenses and using the same thinking, which has already not worked. Scare off the protesters with the presence of the KDF. It will work. That is their thinking. But I'm afraid they're very, very mistaken. Oh, they're so mistaken. To start with, they have really underestimated the anger of Kenyans. And secondly, this thing is organic. They have been busy looking for the leaders. And now it is crystal clear. Even if it is true that at the beginning there are few key people who triggered off this whole thing, it is now organic. Too late. The protests are countrywide. That is clear. And so what the government is doing is repeating the same tactics, which have already failed. They're using the same tactics, hoping that this time they will work. And already, if you've been on social media, it is very clear. What all this is doing to Kenyans is inspiring them, provoking them, inciting them, which is the last thing this government wants. And matters were made worse when number 4, the 4th President of the Republic of Kenya, Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta, yesterday released a statement which had wisdom written all over it, and this has really provoked the UDA camp. What is a retired president doing issuing statements? They're livid! But meanwhile, do you know what the majority of Kenyans are saying? They are saying that the former president's statement made much more sense than Ruto's address to the nation. The two events quickly followed each other, and therefore most Kenyans could not help but contrast and compare, which has exposed one of the biggest problems we have in Kenya today: lack of leadership, let alone wise leadership. That has come out very clearly. And all this is happening when we have opened the door to a very slippery slope. Because you see, with the KDF out there assisting the police, allegedly, how will that work out? Who will command who? Obviously, you can be sure it is the KDF who will command, and the police will be required to follow orders from the KDF, which I can guarantee you the police will not like, do not even like the idea. So already there, iko shida. And then there is the Kindiki camp versus the Duale camp. And I'm thinking that the Kindiki camp will not want to take responsibility for whatever happens. After all, it is the defense docket that is in charge now. Yeah? And so maybe human rights groups should address the defense docket. Hey, what a mess. But still, you can be sure that this is good news for the protesters. Why? Because the other side already has so many problems. The other side is divided. And remember, the other side is behaving like fish out of water, or a bird trying to swim. Because whatever the protesters do, they are not armed, but the people being brought in are heavily armed. And they're not trained to deal with crowd control. They're not. And many people have forgotten that there's a code of honor amongst the military all over the world. Hawapigangi raia risasi. Kwanza hiyo kitu inaweza wasumbua akili sana. They never do that. And so in all this confusion, maybe the Gen Zs are going to achieve the objective of occupying state houses. After all, it should be clear and obvious that it would have been much easier to stop them using the police and even the GSU, the General Service Unit, to stop them. Instead of the confused scenario that we now have, clinging only on the hope that the presence of the KDF will scare off people. Oh boy. Things in Kenya are becoming elephant by the hour. Now, very quickly before I go, in my previous video, I spoke about Joey's dad, actually his late dad, who has always held on firmly to the belief that his son is completely innocent. Well, I have a very sensitive, actually two very sensitive special reports that reveal who the real killers and the real killer of the late Monica Kimani is highly likely to be. You don't want to miss this crazy information. Very early on, shortly after this murder of Monica Kimani that shocked Kenyans, I released some very sensitive information to a limited audience then. I believe this was in 2018, and I was going through that information and I was shocked at the accuracy of that information and how things panned out, because this was before anybody had been charged for the crime. At that time we only had suspects. Nobody had been taken to court yet. And that information tells you very clearly who the real murderer was, and solidifies the theory that Joey was simply framed, a fall guy. And this information names names, both the powers behind it and the person who executed it. Now, for the super curious and the people who want to know, about only 20 people tops are making available to them these highly sensitive special reports. Actually, there are two of them for only $15 or Kenya shillings 1,999. And therefore, if you're interested in knowing the sad thing that happened to Joey, because it could happen to anybody, you can use the information you see on your screens right now to get your hands on this crazy information. Until next time, this is Chris Kumekucha.